Tape to the webinar is now live, Dr. Miller.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 25th, 2021 Emergency Board Meeting of the Prince George's County Board of Education. Before we begin, I would like to ask everyone to turn off any wireless communication devices and mute your microphones to avoid any technical interference with the meeting. Also, we will be using Zoom's Spanish interpretation services this evening. Ms. Shepherd, would you please make an announcement that Spanish interpretation is available for the meeting by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen?
Buenas tardes a todos. La interpretación en español está abajo, donde usted pueda tocar el global abajo de su pantalla.
Okay. Thank you for joining our emergency board meeting, which is being held to discuss a very important topic, the reopening of Prince George's County Public Schools. For those of you who are not able to observe now, this meeting is being recorded and information will be on our board webpage. Ms. Tate, please call the roll.
Good evening, everyone. Miss Adam Stafford.
Present.
Mrs. Ahmed.
Here.
Ms. Boozer Struther.
Here.
Mr. Burrows.
Here.
Mr. Harris. Miss Jackson.
Present.
Mr. Montero.
Here.
Mr. Murray.
Here.
Mrs. Queen.
Present.
Mrs. Shepherd.
Here.
Mr. Thomas.
Here.
Mr. Valentine.
Here.
Mrs. Williams.
Present.
Dr. Miller.
Present. And we have a quorum. Before we proceed, I would like to remind my colleagues that during the first round of questions and responses, you will receive 5 minutes. Then you will receive 3 minutes for the second round. You will hear a buzzer when your time has concluded. I will now ask Dr. Goldson to proceed with her report.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
We have not voted to adopt any agenda for this meeting. So colleagues, as you know, per policy 9360, myself, Ms. Adam Stafford, Mr. Murray, Mr. Burrows, Ms. Ahmed did request this emergency meeting today. That we requested the emergency meeting with a list of several items, including the CEO's report on reopening, as well as policy on community schools, our policy on student attendance, a resolution expanding community workforce agreements for capital improvement projects, our science of reading work group proposal, school to prison pipeline work group, the climate change action plan focus work group, and equity learning hubs, as well as policy and governance committee recommendations, academic achievement committee recommendations, and operations, budget, and fiscal affairs committee recommendations. I, again, as per policy 9360, I did request for all these items along with 4 other board members. Unfortunately, that was not listed on the agenda by the chair. However, because it is very important that we discuss this budget discuss this reopening plan, I am going to move to adopt the agenda that is presented.
I second that.
Thank you, Board Member Thomas and Board Member Stafford. It has been moved in second that we accept the agenda for this emergency meeting tonight. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? It has been, the agenda has been approved. Now we will move into the Chief Executive Officer's report on the Prince George's County Public Schools reopening. Before we proceed, I would like to remind my colleagues that during the first round of questions and responses, as I said before, you'll receive 5 minutes and then you'll receive 3 minutes for the second round. And you will hear a buzzer when your time has concluded. I will now ask Dr. Golson to proceed with her report.
Thank you, Board Chair Miller. When our schoolhouse doors closed last March, I imagined that we would reopen in a few weeks, at most a month, or worst case scenario after spring break. But as the weeks turned into months and then eventually the remainder of one school year and most of the next, the issue of reopening safely for students, employees, and our broader community has remained my highest priority. Last week, I announced our plan to implement a hybrid learning schedule in April that returns students to our school buildings while prioritizing health, safety, equity, and excellence. The hybrid schedule will allow students to split their time between in-person and remote learning, 2 days in person and 3 days virtually. Families may opt into returning in April for in-person learning or continue learning at home for the remainder of the school year. We are currently surveying families in all schools to determine their plans for the rest of the school year. The survey also requests information about transportation needs and other siblings or children in the household. As of today, more than 120,000 families have completed the survey, which is available in our standard English, Spanish, and French, along with 7 other languages. Just over 30% of our families have indicated that their student will return to school in hybrid instruction. We anticipate the full return rate will be about 35%. We are still working diligently to get all families to respond by the February 28th deadline, which is Sunday. Participation reports are forwarded to schools daily, and we will provide information to schools starting Monday on non-respondents so that they can reach out to those families directly for confirmation of their plans. As a school system, we have followed science and data in developing our reopening plans and proceeded thoughtfully at every stage. The decision to return is personal for each family and reflects their child's learning style. I've received many questions about why we're opening at all this school year and why not wait until the fall. What I cannot ignore is the impact that prolonged school closure has had on many of our students. Every parent and educator can speak to this concern. We have adjusted to virtual learning as a necessity. When we speak of the whole child, however, we know that nothing can replace the interaction between students, teachers, and classmates. In terms of the schedule for reopening, next week, our central office staff will return to their assigned work locations, and our school-based staff is encouraged to begin teaching virtually from their classrooms. On March 17th, all school-based staff must return to schools to teach virtually from their classrooms in preparation for our students to return in April. On April 8th, phase 1 instruction will begin with a 2-day hybrid learning schedule for all special education students in kindergarten through grade 12 and for students in pre-kindergarten through 6th grade and all 12th graders. On April 15th, phase 2 instruction will begin for all remaining students in grades 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Our spring break will proceed as scheduled from March 29th through April 5th. For students involved in athletic activities, fall coaches may begin in-person after-school conditioning and outdoor workouts on March 10th. Spring sports season practice will begin April 6th. The last day of school for students will be June 15th, and the last day for teachers will be June 16th. Our administrators, educators, and building services teams are busy preparing our buildings for reopening. We began using new protocols for cleaning and sanitizing in January. They're aligned with CDC guidelines, posted signage throughout school buildings to help guide our learners, upgraded our air filtration system with MERV 13 air filters in every school and office buildings, and stocked our warehouses with personal protective equipment for students and staff. Additionally, each school has a COVID compliance committee comprised of numerous staff members to address health and safety issues and needs weekly. We are continuing to make vaccination clinics available to employees with additional appointment slots released later this week and next week. Details of our reopening plan can be found on the link on the main webpage labeled Reopen PGCPS. We will continue communicating our plans and addressing issues of concern as we move forward. We will also continue to make every effort to improve instruction, and we acknowledge that there are a subgroup of learners who are struggling with the virtual format. And while every family will not choose the hybrid model, our data shows that African American high school students and our elementary English language learners in particular need additional support beyond those we've offered. We encourage families to take a close look at their child's academic progress during this time and make the decision that best suits their needs. We will keep making every effort to improve instruction and provide academic supports for learners who are struggling. And we will make every effort to meet students' needs in a safe and learning environment and address any concerns as best as we can when they arise. Thank you to the 11,370 employees who joined the telephone town hall last Wednesday, and the 30,546 parents, students, and community members who joined the telephone town hall last Thursday, just to ask questions and to get a better understanding of our reopening plans. I will hold an additional meeting on this Saturday at 10 a.m. for all Spanish-speaking families. I appreciate each of you, board members, for taking time prior to today's meeting to hear, discuss, and ask questions about ways we can continue to support the Prince George's County Public School community. I firmly believe that this is the right decision for our school system as a whole and one that we will work through together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Golson, for your report. At this time, I'd like, before taking comments, I'd like to commend Dr. Golson and her team in terms of all the precautions that have been taken in order to comply with the governor's mandate to reopen schools. Thank you, Dr. Golson and team. With that, we'll now turn our attention to public comments on the Prince George's County reopening. The list of speakers is posted to board docs for the community's reference, and speakers will be called in that order. For those who have registered, when you hear your name called, you may begin your testimony, and you will have 3 minutes to present your remarks regarding the Prince George's County Public Schools reopening only. The board will not address your comments. All registered speakers will have 3 minutes to provide comments. At the sound of the buzzer, speakers may complete that sentence only. Registered speakers may not relinquish any part of their speaking time to another registered or unregistered individual. Speakers may not address individuals or issues with profanity or derogatory terms. You will be warned once. If you continue, your comments will be terminated. Speakers are encouraged to use titles rather than names. For example, principal, CEO, deputy superintendent, board member. Your adherence to these guidelines will enable the public participation process to move smoothly. I will begin with
Madam Chair, I have a point of clarification. We're not discussing any of the reopening plans or asking questions of Dr. Goldson.
Unless there are some questions, I can go back.
Yes,
and if
please.
you have some questions, board members, the table is open for you. And Board Member Ahmed, do you have some comments?
I think just one main one to maybe pose to Dr. Golson, to the team. Do we have school checklists for preparedness as we're going into this time? I think that is really important, and I know other districts are doing so. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, we do. Our associate superintendents have created a checklist for principals to utilize. We have a COVID-19 compliance committee that will review those weekly, and that has a representation of several members from that school on that committee. In addition, PGCEA also has an NEA checklist. It's about 7 or 8 pages that they're also utilizing. So we're utilizing a variety of tools to ensure that our buildings are ready to receive staff and students.
Thank you. I think just one suggestion perhaps is, if it's possible, I think it would be really helpful to members of the community to see that published checklist of these items have been done and the school is prepared to reopen. I think that could do really well in building public trust, and building a sense of, I think, security and knowing that our school buildings are prepared for this transition.
Thank you for that recommendation. We're also doing, our communications team are doing videos so that students and parents can see what to expect when they enter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it, Board Member Ahmed? All right, next, Board Member Queen.
Thank you. Give me time to unmute. So first of all, I'm gonna go back to the checklist that Rahila was talking about. That's a great idea, but I think it would be good that each board member also had a copy of every school in their district that they are responsible for, so they can be accountable and transparent to their constituents, the students and the staff of that school, along with it being public. So I want to know if we can also make sure that we get a copy of that. My next question and concern is as we had a meeting last night with the Educational Roundtable, it was brought up about students returning back to school and having to carry their laptops and computers and all back and forth, and the safety of it. I know, sorry guys, I put a mint in my mouth, but I know we addressed it, and one of the things that was suggested last night, and I just wanted to suggest it while the community is listening, that it's going to take all of us to ensure the safety of our community. I did want to address with Dr. Golson. I'm hoping that we're reaching out to our local police department and asking them to step up in the morning, in the daytime, especially as the kids are going back to school. But I'm also asking our parents and our community members to step up also as the kids are going out. If you guys can be the eyes and ears of the community, if parents, if you're able to walk the kids to the bus to make sure that they're able to get their laptops, on the bus, and they'll be able to come back. Because I am concerned as a parent, I would be concerned. I'm concerned as a grandparent if my, granddaughter decides to go back and she's carrying a $200-300 computer. We know we have to worry about that, not just about our kid, but every kid. So as a school system, we are concerned, and we want to make sure that we're putting our kids first for a change. Because of COVID, we know they need their own individuals. They can't be sharing. But even in saying that, we have to work together because only together we can do this. So I just want to share this point with the safety of Dr. Golson to make sure, again, that we're reaching out to the police department, our local police department around our schools, and asking them to step up. But I'm also asking our community members and our parents to step up also, because it's going to take each and every one of us to make sure that our kids get back and forth to the school safely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Board Member Queen. I just want to use this opportunity just as a reminder to our community that we have several schools that have been one-to-one prior to the pandemic. Oxon Hill, Fairmont High Schools, Buck Lodge are just an example of students that had technology and have been going back and forth to school with it. And I agree with Board Member Queen that community piece is key. I will say, even when we distributed laptops from our schools, as parents pulled up to get laptops, they did see a police presence because they were there too. And we'll continue to utilize that as well. So thank you.
I see Board Member Boozer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. Thank you so much, Dr. Goldson, for the reopening plan. I wanted to, just say thanks to all the principals and school communities hosting the very detailed Zoom meetings with parents and the presentations. I've been to many this week, and I want to say the consistency around the safety is there. Like I think we're all concerned about the sort of what that checklist is. I want to compliment everyone on that and what I'm seeing, and I know I'll be attending many more and hearing questions from parents. And the one I wanted to see if you could dive into a little more would be the COVID-19 testing protocols. I know that through email you had mentioned you were still working some of that out. If you're able to share more tonight. And the other would be the if you're currently using your own device, if that will work in the school buildings, or if that will have to be swapped out for a PGCPS Chromebook. So those two items. And then I did want to offer a compliment to Board Member Queen, Anthony Tillman, and the roundtable last night. Mr. Stanton, Dr. Facette, Mr. Stefanelli presented really deep detail on the cleaning of the building, how that was going to function. And it's recorded on YouTube. I know I promoted it on Facebook, but I would highly recommend that for folks who really want to understand the daily cleaning process. And just want to thank them for taking the time to do that, because it took a while. So but those two questions, if you can speak to those, thank you so much.
Sure, I'll start with the one that's the shortest first, and that's around Chromebooks. And so we are grateful for the families who allow their students to use their own home device when we first started in the pandemic, because if you recall, we didn't have enough, but then we did use CARES Act funds to purchase laptops for our students. And so we are now fully a one-to-one site. So what I would strongly encourage for those students who are returning to the building to do is to, one, bring their personal device when they first arrive, but to alert their teacher that they have it, so that we can begin the process of swapping out, so that we can give them a Chromebook in place of their device. And the advantage of doing that is it allows us to add an additional safety measure. We have lots of filters that have the ability to screen out some of the resources and sites that we do not want our students to go to. And we're able to do that, do a better job of doing that when we have that device that's already plugged into our system versus one where your own personal device, you have the ability to circumvent those filters. So we definitely want to ask that they trade them out if possible. And then around testing, we're doing two types of testing, symptomatic and asymptomatic. So Maryland State Department of Education has partnered with the governor, and who's doing a Maryland testing program, and that is for symptomatic cases. And that symptomatic means that, you know, if a child comes in and they have sniffles or they have a fever, even let's say they didn't have it when they left home, because I know our parents are going to do an inventory and check their children before they leave their home. But let's say they're at school and they become ill, which does happen. The nurse will be trained on how to do that symptomatic testing to ensure that, well, my dog now wants to add in, but to ensure that the student is okay. And if we get the results back that yield that there is a positive case, then we will begin the next level of testing, which is where our symptomatic testing comes, which is where our asymptomatic testing comes in, and we'll have PCR tests for that. We are going through the process now of making sure that every staff member will be trained on both symptomatic, asymptomatic. We plan to do testing once a week. And so as it's ever evolving, we have to put out an RFP for the asymptomatic testing. But for the symptomatic, those tests will be provided and funded through Maryland State Department of Ed. So we'll continue to provide even more comprehensive information around testing as we move closer through the middle of March to the end of March.
Thank you, Dr. Golson.
Thank you for accepting my dog, adding in her 15 minutes. Thank you.
I didn't understand you.
Sorry for the dog.
Oh. Ms. Tate, I don't know what's going on with my computer, but it keeps telling me that you have me muted or to start the video. So would you check that? Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. I'm not.
Okay. The other hand that I did see raised before I lost video was Ms. Adams, board member Stafford.
Thank you. My question is specifically in regards to the air quality reports. So I know that we asked about this back in December, and I think many people in my community have reached out and asked questions when we would have access to the air quality reports that I know the tests were completed. And I wanted to just echo the sentiments of Board Member Ahmed, and something that I've talked to you about, also Dr. Goldson and others, having those checklists, the completed checklist available for transparency on a centralized website, on the reopening website, possibly so that parents and families can see at a glance sort of where their school stacks up in terms of having the correct filters, plumbing, water resources within their schools. So I guess my first question was about the indoor air quality program and where we were with that. And then also, I think a lot of teachers and families have reached out specifically just about sort of the involvement of the teachers within this plan. I know specifically teachers are not having that opportunity to do planning outside of class and no duty-free lunch. And so those were some of the concerns that folks have raised as well.
So let me start first with the reports. I thought I've done a lot of interviews, but I thought I brought this up in last week's community telephone town hall, but I'll reiterate. We have completed the air quality assessments for all 206 schools. There were 4 or 5 vendors that completed it. What we were waiting on is all of those vendors to provide the written report so we could post them all at one time. Because what I didn't want the community to do is to believe that theirs wasn't posted because there was something wrong with air quality. So that was not the case. I will follow back up with Chief Stanton to find out how close they are to completing those air quality assessments so I can give the community an update. But they will be posted on each school's like landing school webpage so that the school that your child attends, you can review it. I'm also going to recommend that is where we put the checklist as well, because many of what we do know from our own data analytics from our website is that families go directly to their school's website. They don't always come to the PGCPS main webpage. So we'll be doing it on the school specific landing page. Around the reopening plan, we have listed in the very front, the back of the guide, the 81 members that participated in the reopening plan. And while we started this process back in July, they have been integral in reviewing the report and providing input throughout this entire process, even up until this latest update. And so the good thing about our reopening plan is that what we have displayed on our main webpage, which was approved by Maryland State Department of Education in August, is exactly the plan that we're following now with a few updates. You'll find the list of those members, those 81 members in that reopening plan, which is still posted on our PGCPS website. And then lastly, around teachers' planning time and lunch, that is a requirement as part of their negotiated agreement. And I expect that all principals would adhere to the negotiated agreement, and we will make sure that all employees receive their duty-free lunchtime as well as their required planning time. So thank you for those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Golson. I did see 2 other hands, but I can't see them now because something is going on with my my video, my ability to see you. So,
Okay, Dr. Miller, I can assist you with that if you'd like.
thank you.
You're welcome. So the next person on the list is Kenneth Harris.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for acknowledging me, Dr. Miller and Vice Chair Sonia Williams. Dr. Golson, thanks so much for the plan that you and your staff put together. My question actually stems from a lot of questions I've been getting from District 7 residents, as well as teachers regarding the reopening plan. For the sake of everyone listening, can you speak to the strategy that you and your staff utilized when gaining input from our unions, our educators, our staff, and how that input was implemented into the final reopening plan?
Yeah. So we have 2 plans. We have a school reopening plan, which you'll find on our main webpage that had community input, once again, from the 81 members that are listed. They're representatives from all of the labor partners, meaning ASASP, SEIU, PGCEA, and Local 400. So there are employees that fit in those categories, their teachers, their central office staff, their parents, their community members. It was a wide range of input. Then we also have a reopening operational guide, and that is a guide that's used specifically for school staff. And that guide first was created by our internal team, and then we shared it with all labor partners first, the leaders of those labor partners. They provided input. We then shared that same document with principals and the reopening committee that I just referenced before. They provided more questions than input. We created a frequently asked questions document to go along with that operational guide. So we have 2 documents. So you could say we have a reopening guide that's that you find on the main webpage, that's for the entire community. And then we have what we could call an addendum or playbook, and that's the operational guide that our principals follow, that we received input from our labor partners. That's where I mentioned the COVID-19 compliance committee, talks about care rooms, which are the rooms where students will go who will be isolated if we find that they're sick or have COVID. It talks about the protocol if we find a positive student. It goes through very specific items, and much of that is what Board member Pamela Boozer-Strother referenced in those community meetings that our principals are having. They're sharing lots of information from that they'll be handling in their schools. So we have like a public facing document and one that's for literally the operation daily.
I'm back. Thank you, Dr. Golson. Board member Valentine. Your hand is up.
Thank you very much. My question is, as I'm looking at other districts around the country open, many of them have had to close down because of increased cases or outbreaks in certain schools. What is the measurement you're going to use to determine whether a school will be closed down, and what will be the impact on parents and others and educators in that building?
Yeah, this is where contract tracing is important and key. So at the elementary level, of course, our students tend to be more isolated in a classroom and do not have to do a class change. And so we'll be able to isolate that class if we find that there's a positive case, and we'll alert parents immediately. And those students will then do a virtual learning experience from home along with the teaching staff who's been in contact with them. This is where the testing comes into play. We'll also be able to do the testing upon their dismissal from school so that we can provide those results to families so that they do not have to find locations to go to get that testing. If we find that there are, based on Maryland State Department of Ed and CDC guidelines, several outbreaks in a school, several meaning 2 to 3 outbreaks within that same day at a school, then we will begin the process of closing the entire school. And we'll continue to adhere to those CDC guidelines around that area. When students go back home and then they're in a quarantine status, they're in a virtual learning experience so that the delivery of instruction is not impacted.
One follow-up, is there an estimated timeline of how long that school will be closed if and when an outbreak happens?
Based on CDC guidelines now, and we have this posted and have shared this in our cleaning protocol, what we do is then isolate the area. Our cleaning staff goes in either that night or the first thing the next day to clean, sanitize the area, and then it reopen. You'll see that in the cases that I present to you daily around COVID-19 closures. That's the process and procedures that we've used if it's just been in an isolated case. If it's an outbreak, then we have to consult with our local health department to make a determination of how best to handle and when they recommend that we should consider reopening.
Any other questions? Board Member Valentine, thank you. Next, Board Member Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to also thank Dr. Golson for her hard work on this and turning this around in such an efficient manner. Colleagues, I think it's important that the Board of Education continue to review this plan, have a real say in the approval of it and any potential modifications to it. And as such, I would like to move to have the reopening plan come back to the board for approval at our next regularly scheduled board meeting on March 11th. And furthermore, would like to move to direct the CEO to enter into negotiations for an MOU on reopening with labor partners that would like to do so, with board member Shayla Adams Stafford being the board's representative at those negotiations. Thank you.
Second.
Is this a motion?
Yes.
Hold up for a minute.
No problem.
Dr. Wait a minute. Let me be clear.
Finish the process and then I'll make my comment.
Okay, no, I just want to be clear on what just happened. Board Member Murray made a motion to repeat it, Mr. Board Member, please.
Sure. I move to have the reopening plan come back to the Board of Education at our next regularly scheduled meeting for approval on March the 11th. And furthermore, to direct the CEO to enter into negotiations for an MOU on reopening with labor partners that are interested in doing so, with board member Shayla Adams Stafford as the board's representative at those negotiations.
And there was a second to that.
Yes, ma'am, that was me.
Let's have discussion, Dr. Golson.
Thank you. I just want to make a note that we have done a reopener for one of our negotiated, for one of our labor partners because it is part of their labor contract. And so as stated before, we'll continue to adhere to the provisions outlined in our negotiated contract and make sure that everything that you have approved in those contracts will be definitely completed. And That's for the negotiated contracts. And then for the second one around the vote for the reopening of schools, I just want to make a note that in House Bill 1107, it states that the CEO is the executive officer, secretary, and treasurer of the County Board of Education and is responsible for the overall administration of the county school system and the day-to-day management and oversight of the fiscal affairs of the school system. And then I have utilized this portion of House Bill 1107 when we did the school closure in July, when we discussed it again in December, as well as the provision now that we're proposing in April.
Board Member Murray, would you like to amend your, based on what Dr. Golson just presented to us, would you like to amend your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to keep the motion as is. So I mean, in my review of all of the different school boards and structures across the state, it's typical and in fact, pretty much always the practice that superintendents or CEOs are responsible for the day-to-day management of school systems and fiscal affairs. That's absolutely true. And I still think that this motion is completely within the rights of the Board of Education. And so would like to keep the motion on the floor.
So does everyone understand what we are approving? Board Member Williams, your hand is up.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to get some clarification. Board Member Murray is asking for us to have an opportunity to review the reopening plan. I'm just trying to understand, what would we be adding other than what we're adding here? What happens if what we see does not comply with what you're looking for? How do we work that out as we move into reopening in like a month? What would you say is the process for us to review, give questions, have comments, have the CEO and her staff respond to those questions and comments? If we do not agree on how things are going to operate, how do we work out those differences in the timeline in which we're trying to meet the state mandate for reopening?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I think there's a number of ways that we can go about it. I'm certainly going to open up the Budget and Operations Committee to take feedback, additional public comment, recommendations from board members. I think all of us obviously have the right to continue to submit questions and get answers. And I think really this is just looking to build a collaborative effort and have a very collaborative approval on March 11th. So, it's not something that, in any way is seeking to slow anything down. And I think, all the plans that have been made should continue to move forward, but just one that's formalizing that, like all other local school boards, our school board will also be approving the plan.
Any further discussion? I see Board Member Strother.
Sorry, thank you so much, Chair Miller. Couple of questions. One, I know in July, when we met on the original reopening plan, we did a vote to receive the plan, and I thought that was appropriate at the time. And I'm, Dr. Goldson's management of this has been outstanding in a national model, and I stand behind continuing to move forward the way we have. I think we've had a very open and collaborative process, and we are now down at the school building level with principals and parents receiving this information. And so I think it's really important that we keep going under Dr. Goldson's leadership. My second question around the move to negotiations and MOUs, there was a recommendation of a board representative at these negotiations. I don't recall that any board member has been involved in negotiations with our labor partners at that level. And I would like to get some legal clarity on this from Mr. Roger Thomas, as well as just ensuring that this motion at this point in time in this emergency meeting is also appropriate. Thank you so much.
Ms. Boozer-Strother, would you mind if I give just a really short context before Mr. Thomas speaks?
Sure.
Prior to even my serving on the board, it was common practice for board members to be in those negotiations. And so it's kind of just seeking to reinstate that old practice. And I'll let Mr. Thomas answer.
Yeah, let's listen to Mr. Thomas, because something being a common practice and something versus policy, we have to make that distinction. Mr. Thomas, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. Mr. Thomas,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Thank you, board members, for the opportunity of addressing this issue. So on the issue of board members at the quote unquote negotiation table, if there is going to be negotiations on an MOU, I urge the board to move with caution if you're going to implement that type of process, because traditionally, at least to my knowledge, board members have not participated directly at that level as part of any negotiations process. Rather, the board is normally brought that information through the CEO and the negotiations team. So I would just definitely urge the board to proceed with caution in going down that road. I think Mr. Murray's comments and recommendations about the board receiving follow-up information on the school reopening plans is of great benefit to the board and the members of the public, and it's certainly something that should happen. I do want to state that Dr. Goldson has quoted the language from the House bill that's now codified in the education article at section 4-402, and she's correctly stated the day-to-day responsibilities that fall within the power of the CEO. So, I do want the board also to proceed with extreme caution around that issue. I think the team approach to making sure that there's a collaborative process between the board and CEO and keeping the members of the public informed and keeping yourselves informed of how the CEO and administration are rolling out the plan is certainly a beneficial one. Whether or not the board needs to actually, quote unquote, approve it is subject to debate. And I do think that Dr. Goldson has correctly stated the distinction here with respect to school reopening, since it does involve the day-to-day delivery of educational services to students of the Prince George's County Public Schools.
So with that being said, Mr. Board Member Murray, would you like to amend or withdraw your motion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to keep the motion as stated.
Okay, the motion has been moved and second for the CEO to provide the board members with the plan for reopening schools. And was there something else other than
Would you
that?
like me to read it one more time?
Say it.
Sure. I move to have the reopening plan come back to the board for approval at our next regularly scheduled board meeting on March 11th, and also move to direct the CEO to enter in negotiations for an MOU on reopening with labor partners interested in doing so, with board member Shayla Adams Stafford as the board's representative at those negotiations.
Okay, let's call for, any more discussion? I see board member.
I had my hand up. I had a question. Dr. Goldson, you mentioned that members of different unions were involved in the reopening committee. However, were any of the collective bargaining units of those unions involved in the reopening creation?
Yes, they were. I shared that information also with board member Harris. Yes.
Any other?
Sure, I can address further for those labor partners that are reaching out to you. I can once again have that conversation with them again. They're talking about the team of 81. Those labor partners wanted to select individual people to be in that group of 81. Those members were randomly selected, and many of those people who sit on it that were members of our staff are also part of the labor groups. They just wanted to pick them themselves, which is why when we did the supplemental guide, we sent it directly to the labor partners and spent time in a meeting with them, going through them line by line.
Board member Burrows, your hand has been up for a minute.
No comment.
Oh, well, you have your hand up. Board member Curtis Valentine.
Thank you. I just wanted the attorney, Dr. Thomas, for clarification. I'll be perfectly honest, with all due respect, your interpretation was rather confusing. And you mentioned the idea that it's up for interpretation, it's up for debate. You mentioned you quoted legislation. Can you be clear about the role and responsibility of this board based on policy as it relates to the condition of this reopening plan moving forward being conditional on the board voting on it? Yes or no?
You're on mute. Unmute.
I put my hand back up to address that issue further, Mr. Valentine. So I appreciate your raising that question and asking for additional clarification. So I was citing from the statutory provisions in the Maryland Annotated Code, which does delegate to the CEO the responsibility for the day-to-day management of the school system. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that the board, is aware of, that in the event the board did not want to accept the CEO's reopening plan, that would require a two-thirds vote. But I do believe that area of responsibility does fall upon the chief executive officer.
So in your interpretation, reopening plan is in line with the day-to-day operations of the school system?
I do interpret that as being within the day-to-day operations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that also means that if the board does want to have that matter brought back to you all at the next March meeting, to take action contrary to that which the CEO is stating would require a two-thirds vote. I hope that clarifies the issue, Mr. Valentine. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Burrows, are you up? Board Member Burrows, do you have a comment this time? Your hand is still up.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before you go on, we do have public comment, speakers, and we have a 7 o'clock meeting, and it is now 9 minutes before that meeting. So I'm going to ask that we cut our comments and we can bring this up at the March 11th meeting.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say for the record that I'm very pleased with the reopening plan and everything that has gone into it. And I understand the concern that I'm hearing from my colleagues about ensuring that our collective bargaining individuals have a seat at the table. I think from what I've heard from all of the colleagues, has brought consensus around this plan and is well thought out. And I think the only point of contention is allowing those bargaining units that do have concerns to, discuss them in a collaborative way. I think a previous colleague asked about board members' roles at the collective bargaining stage. To clarify, the collective bargaining agreement is between the Board of Education and the collective bargaining unit. And so in the past, in my earlier days, Pat Fletcher was our liaison to the collective bargaining units. And I think that is what Mr. Murray is attempting to do in this case, which is not unusual. But I just want to publicly say, I think it's a solid reopening plan that's been well thought out. I don't feel strongly one way or the other about this motion. Caught me off guard, but I do believe that it would be valuable to have a conversation with any of those collective bargaining partners that, legitimately want to represent their members. And so I think that's what I'm hearing Mr. Murray is attempting to do. I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
I really would like for somebody to call for the question because we can further discuss this. I'd like to go, because we only have now 7 minutes until our next meeting, and we have not gotten to the public comment speakers yet.
Well, my hand is up.
I know 2 other people are ahead of you, Board Member Queen. Ms. Williams, Board Member Williams, your hand is up.
My comment was not about the motion. It was about the reopening presentation that Dr. Golson presented. So I can pause that I don't need to have that comment right now. I can wait and allow the community to give their input.
Oh, thank you. Board Member Queen.
Yes, so mine was about both, and I think the motion that was made will kind of help it out. So I have no problem with waiting until March the 11th. To be honest with you guys, I want about the social emotional well-being of our, not just our students, but our faculty, our staff, and the community of what's about to happen here in Prince George's County. It's a lot going on within that year. People being home, COVID is real. It was real in my household with a lot of my family members. It was real because it hit me. And so this is a real thing that's going on, and socially, emotionally, people are going through some things, and even our employees are skeptical with coming back. Parents are skeptical with sending their kids. I think as a board, we need to sit back, and yes, Dr. Golson and her team has done a great job, and in all honesty, some of her staff is still a little bit skeptical about it. I just think that we just need a little bit more time, and as we dive in it, we need to make sure that all of our the 9 dots are covered. We need to make sure that our system, our school system, is ready to be reopened without any lawsuits, without any issue. We need to make sure that every school has air filters. We need to make sure every school has meted every CDC requirement. So I am in agreement for us to wait. Thank you.
Board Member Murray, and this will be the last one, and I guess I'll have to call for the question.
No, sorry, my that's probably just never got taken down. I'd like to call for the question.
All in favor of the motion made by Board Member Murray? Aye. Let's do a roll call.
Okay. Ms. Adam Stafford.
Aye.
Mrs. Ahmed.
Aye.
Ms. Boozer Struther.
No.
Mr. Burrows.
Aye.
Mr. Harris.
Aye.
Ms. Jackson.
No.
Mr. Montero.
No.
Mr. Murray.
Aye.
Mrs. Queen.
Aye.
Mrs. Shepherd.
No.
Mr. Thomas.
Aye.
Mr. Valentine.
No.
Ms. Williams.
No.
Dr. Miller.
No.
One moment, please. I have 7 and 7.
The motion fails. We will now move to the public comment speakers. Thank you, colleagues, for this dialogue and exchange. It was very informative. The first.
I'm sorry, I have a point of clarification. I don't know if I'm out of order here. Are we still going to, after the public comment, discuss the agenda items that we approved at the beginning of the meeting?
There was only one agenda item for this meeting, and that was the reopening of schools.
That's correct.
I thought that we approved the items that were submitted, the emergency items that were submitted.
No. Mr. Thomas, would you handle that, please?
If I may, Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Thomas. Mr. Thomas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the board did approve the amended, the agenda as proposed, and with that being with the school reopening issue being the only item on this evening's agenda. And Mr. Burrows, if you have a different interpretation, please share that.
No, I think that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Now can we move, I would like to move into the public comment speakers because we only have 2 minutes left, and which will mean we will run late into our 7 o'clock meeting. So with that, I'd like to call first on Mikal Matthews, a student at Parkdale High School. Is he still on?
Yes, ma'am, I'm still on. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Sorry I don't have my camera on. I'm a little shaken up this evening. I had a funeral to attend. But like you said, my name is Mikal Thomas Matthews. I'm a sophomore at Parkdale High School, and a happy-go-lucky person in general. But this evening, I'm a little less happy. I had noticed that Dr. Goldson mentioned taking action on issues that are making our community struggle. And this board, I assume, would like to meet students' needs in a safe learning environment. I would like to ask, what is a safe learning environment, at least to you all? This board has come under some hot water as of recently for some questionable decisions made. Some board members are more surprised and disappointed at than others. And I do commend this county's leadership during these difficult times in this pandemic. And so while we are gathering support for legislation that would help us, we've been shut down, to say it quite frankly. And it was just about to happen again. As I understand, you all have a meeting. However, I would like to beg the question, what meeting is more important than the safety and the lives of the youth, such as myself and the different youth that I represent? We're fighting for equality. And like I said, Dr. Golson laid out that the point of concern for this board was helping African-American communities that are struggling as of right now. And I wish I could say that was just of right now, but no, this is a long-term thing. This has been going on for quite a long time. And I'm only perturbed that everyone seems so scared to mention the big, ugly SR compound word, systematic racism. And God forbid I ask someone to give me their opinion and stances of what is ever changing. Now, there's no beating around the bush when it comes to these issues. And I want to ask, are you all willing to fix the problem? The issue that this board has clearly laid out as a priority, as you all have clearly said. This board just a few minutes ago had called on police departments to help out and step up to the plate during these hard, difficult times. However, let me remind you that the last time they were there to, quote, help, George Floyd happened. And before him, Ahmaud Arbery, Michael Brown, I could go down a long list. And how can we forget Trayvon Martin? How many more names, can I just ask, need to be added to that list? Because believe me, and I say this wholeheartedly with my full heart and with candor and truth as much as possible, I swear to God, that if my name needs to be added to that list next, and I'm all for it. Someone could just put the gun right to my head and shoot. As long as my name's on that list, as long as the hundreds of thousands of students in this county are getting benefit from my name, from George Floyd's name, from any other name, then I'm all for it. Shoot me dead. Because I say that with wholeheartedness and candor. So, like I said, we can go down the list of priorities in school safety, and I truly wish you all could see the absence of joy in my face, as I would happily look you in the eye and tell you that we, the students, are struggling. Accountability will be held for those who it applies to, of course. And I've said this on many occasions respectfully, but I'll say it bluntly now. Just because election time is over does not mean your public service is over. I will tackle this issue head on, of course, like anything else I've spoken about, and as a truth be told, when will we begin an actual debate and conversation on security resource officers? As a public servant myself, I have heard from those that I represent, and this is something that has troubled them for a very, very long time, both student and teacher and parent. How will we topple the systematic oppression that is choking youth, choking them, such as myself, suffocating from the reluctance this board shows to do nothing about it? We can talk about equality all we want to be quite honest with you, but what are we doing about it?
Excuse me, Mr. Matthews, thank you very much for your comments. Your time is up and I have to move to the next speaker. And if you have additional comments, they will be welcome if you would put them in writing and send them to the board members. Again, thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Mr. Emerson Twine, student at Charles Herbert Flowers High School. Mr. Twine, you are muted.
Got you, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Like stated before, my name is Emerson T. Wang. I'm a senior here at Charles Herbert Flowers High School. I'm a member of the Science Technology Program, an athlete, a tutor, oldest of 5, and a member of various honor societies. However, today I come to you as an advocate serving as a voice of my student body on the topic of mental health. Reflecting on my own past experience with mental health, I came to the realization that although we don't talk about it enough, students just like myself are struggling with the mental health and it needs to be addressed, especially when we look at the onset of returning back to school and with the eventual normalcy. This is the issue that all students are struggling with. However, I believe that for any argument for change to be valid, it needs to be data. And so I created a student survey to capture the voice of students like myself. And here are some of the questions asked in that survey that in a short lifespan have garnered over 150 student responses. 1, what is it that you wish you could talk about with counselors, but you don't see the opportunity to? 2, do you think hiring more counselors would better help address mental health? If so, and why? And 3, feel free to use this space to discuss your own struggles with mental health and what resources you would like to see implemented on the county level in the future. My survey indicates that students want to speak primarily to their counselors on their mental health and feelings, as well as navigating the college process and looking to life after high school, which has become only more increasingly difficult during distance learning. An overwhelming majority of students acknowledge that our counselors have an intense caseload, which prevents them from truly catering to each and every one of their students. The students have stated that they wish to see a hiring of more counselors when we return back to school that are trained to deal with mental health. And some of the issues prevalent in those responses included work-life balance, depression, anxiety, and self-esteem. Our students generally want to speak, but feel like there are no safe outlets and that no one cares. When asked to rate the county's approach to mental health on a scale of 1 to 5, over 90% of students gave a rating between 1 and 3. We can't expect our students to aspire and achieve academic excellence when we think about reopening if we do not teach and provide means for them to take care of themselves. After all, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and self-actualization is the last on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tawang. And your comments are appreciated. And if you'd like to send them into the board for further responses, you're welcome to do so. Next is Dana Parker. I don't have a title except as an individual.
That's fine. Thank you. It is disappointing that there wasn't the foresight to call this meeting discussing the reopening of schools until there was actually a public outcry related to the appointed chair canceling meetings because all the other appointed members of the school board in the support with District 9 and District 3 decided not to come to meetings to not vote on critical issues that deal with our school system. So that's the first thing. The idea that all the appointed board members and 2 of the elected members would refuse to attend board meetings in order to avoid voting on key and critical issues facing our students, such as reopening, gives a clear indication of their priorities, which seems to lie against the students and families of PGCPS and their decision. I understand that this is a gubernatorial mandate that Dr. Golson is doing her best to accommodate. I have continued, and along with the community, we definitely agree that Dr. Golson is doing her best to fulfill this mandate. That being said, for the last several months, during the push for P3s, all I heard about was the school construction couldn't be done. We had HVAC systems that had millions and millions of dollars in all our schools. So now those HVAC systems, what happened? Did y'all find the millions of dollars to fix those HVAC systems that was killing our students? No, we just gonna rely on filters. Filters. Okay. All right, y'all. Okay. And then do teachers have the same options as the parents in regards to not returning to school and having the ability to teach via distance learning? The teachers should have the same abilities and same options as the parents. Like that should be afforded to them. They're not any less people just because they're teachers of PGCPS. The dysfunction of the school board, as the county executive characterized it, this is what she said. Began when the school board was changed to the hybrid board from being fully elected by the HB 1107 legislation that was earlier cited. And we can clearly see that this is still on display in regards to just the reopening process, right? And how this dysfunction continues to be at the detriment of the students and parents at this critical time. The appointed members, supported by District 3 and District 9, continue to make decisions that block good governance of our school system. That's what it is. With little to no advertising, a petition entitled Democracy Now! Has garnered over 100 signatures in just a few hours, which demands that agenda items be put on the agenda for school board and school governance that focus on addressing school reopening, reimagining safety, ending the school to prison pipeline, equity hubs, climate action change, literacy work groups, and legislative advocacy. To say that you represent the people of Prince George's County, that you have the family's best interests in heart, and not try to have these on the agenda to address is a direct violation of that statement. one appointed member, I think it was Shepherd, she said at some point, oh, I represent all of PG County and Prince George's County teachers and students and this, that, and third, even though I wasn't elected.
Ms. Parker, your time is up. Thank you.
Oh, okay, I get to finish my sentence though,
And
right?
the rest of
I get
your,
to finish my sentence.
you may send your comments in to the board.
Oh, I thought I could finish my sentence like you said, but okay, no worries.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Gerard. Oh, and Ms. Parker, you're welcome to send your comments in to the board as well. Gerard Tyler.
Good evening, members of the Prince George's County Board of Education. My name is Gerard Tyler, a proud parent of a 4.0 student at Maya Angelou French Immersion School. I am also the PTSA president and a concerned member of my community. I would first like to commend Dr. Golson and her team on her hard work and dedication for our scholars. I know that over the past few months, you've been put in precarious positions politically, but I want to publicly state that I am proud of your stance against political pressure and appreciate your leadership during this pandemic. Please know that you will always have the support of the Maya Angelou French Immersion School community. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same thing about the leadership of this board. Madam Chair, your decision to suspend the February 11th board meeting because of a contract dispute disappoints and irritates me to no end. It amazes me how we as parents try to teach our children how they are supposed to work with one another, even in disagreement, only for them to see this circus act broadcasted on television. While I understand the concern, making a decision to hijack our board meeting is irresponsible, incomprehensible, and flat out disrespectful to the tax-paying citizens of our county. What makes matters worse is that you were supported by the appointed members of this board as well. Might I remind you that we are currently in a pandemic and we have key issues such as removing SROs, the installation of equity learning hubs that directly impact our scholars to deal with. We simply do not have time for anyone to use our scholars to play political games. This foolishness has to stop now. If you are unable to conduct yourself accordingly going forward, I strongly suggest that you resign from this post effective immediately because we simply do not have the time for these shenanigans. And to our county executive, if you are watching this broadcast, you ran on the platform to support a fully elected board. This is your appointment and we have not heard a word from your office. Please remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Next, we will have Crystal Oriata from PG Changemakers.
Thank you for the time and opportunity to speak. I have to say that I, as an advocate and organizer who has been working tirelessly alongside so many community members to see the removal of armed officers from our school system, investment in mental health services, along with the Equity Learning Lab, Equity Learning Hubs put into our county, and to see those items not even be heard nor voted on is a disappointment. As organizers and activists, we do everything you're asked us to do. We email you, we call you, we show up, we testify. We understand you all might not always align with us, but at least you could do the decency of voting and calling it to a vote, putting it on the agenda. When we talk about the reopening, we have to understand that forcing our educators into the school system when they do not feel safe, that we are dealing with a pandemic. Some of us have lost family members. I see family members struggling to gain back their bodily functions. I was blessed to survive with COVID with no consequence, but that's not the reality for every single person. And so when you understand the gravity of that, please do not pay politics with this or think these are political stunts for us that show up at this meeting every single time you meet as boards or committees. It's because we honestly care about this. People are dying. And forcing people into that situation, you should be ashamed of yourselves. And so we're just asking you to do the right thing. We're just asking you to call it to the vote. We're just asking you to have a discussion on the things that the community has asked for. You do not have to always stand with us, but you have to do your job, what you are elected to do or appointed to do. And if you don't have the decency to do that, resign, step aside, because we don't have to always agree, but you have to leave Trump-like Republican-style politics out of the school system. So please vote on those issues, no matter where you stand on the issue. If we win or lose, I'm an advocate that's been on the losing side plenty of times, but please don't disregard the teachers, students, parents, advocates that have worked tirelessly to at least have these things heard. That's the decent thing that you can all do. So again, I thank you for the time and opportunity that you at least called this meeting. Hopefully the next meeting will actually have the items on the agenda that we have all asked for.
Thank you, Ms. Oriata. Next, Ms. Amity Pope from PG Changemakers. Ms. Pope?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna start by saying that I would like so it's very clear now that the reopening plan is in the hands of the CEO. And as the co-founder of PG Changemakers, I'm gonna speak from our members that are educators, that are parents, that are students. And I'm gonna ask that as you go back through looking at the equity plan, that some things, it's looked at through an equity lens, not the equity plan, the reopening plan. It's looked through an equity lens because right now it's like a one size fits all model approach. I think I heard correctly that 35% of students there's a response rate of them returning. So for teachers that have compromised immune systems, that have made it this far to stay alive by being in their homes or living with other people because they are technically homeless, that are single parents that have students that attend the school system, but they've opted them to be out, but they're encouraged to bring them to the school, and or families that are both employed by the school system and their students are too, or a newborn, right? We can't have these children at home and there's no childcare. And just the feasibility of buildings being open, like we don't have to, the reopening plan is tightly written, and everything that has come out of your administration has been tightly written and put together. But sometimes it seems that we've all heard people say we don't have to build the plane, or we're building the plane while we're flying or something like that. Like the equity learning hubs, I really would urge you to consider the equity learning hubs as the first step to the reopening plan for individuals that elect to be a part of that, whether they are the parents of our most vulnerable students or they are educators that are ready to get out of their homes. But a lot of people are scared to return. And in some cases, it's not done in an equitable, and in this case, they're seeing it as not an equitable manner, or even acknowledging the CDC suggestions of the hybrid model for employees. So being gravely in fear that someone is going to become sick, and move from sickness to being gravely ill or dying. People made it this far for those that were able to make it. So I hope my words are heard, and on behalf of the teachers, the parents, and the students, a part of PG Changemakers, that's all I have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Daniel Green.
Members of the board, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying Black Lives Matter, Black Students Matter, and Black Voters Matter. I speak as a parent, UMD professor, longtime researcher within DCPS, and community organizer in Mount Rainier. I want to note also that the Zoom link on the homepage is dead, another way that the chair's office, deliberately or not, has shut out the public. Dr. Juanita Miller and other unelected appointed board members have shut down the board by refusing to hold normal meetings and announcing investigations into their elected opposition, investigations which are not happening, leaving the public with the inescapable conclusion that this is a clumsy ploy designed to overturn legitimate elections. In this moment of crisis, we cannot play politics with the 134,000 largely Black and brown children in PGCPS, one of the largest districts in the country. They and we deserve better. Last November, Ms. Adam Stafford and Mr. Dixon defeated Also Brooks endorsed incumbents and joined the board's progressive elected majority. On February 8th, Dr. Miller delivered a letter to the county council announcing her intention to cancel.
Your comments should be reflective of the reopening of school.
Yep, we're discussing the democratic supervision of the school board.
That you're
discussing. We're discussing the democratic supervision of reopening, which is exactly what's happening. The Democratic Supervision School Board was canceled by Dr. Miller, who refused to hold the hearings that were promised on the agenda because she wanted an investigation into unnamed elected board members and an audit of the past 2 years of board business. She canceled the February 11th board meeting with the support of appointed members and elected members, Ms. Williams and Ms. Boozer-Struther. This week, Ms. Williams and Dr. Miller, who famously left WSSC under her own corruption scandal, called a meeting in order to fulfill her constitutional duty to vote on the budget, but left out all missing business, including, most importantly, for reopening the equity learning hubs. They then allowed this emergency meeting to convene, but illegally altered the agenda to exclude the elected majority's requested items. None of this is allowed for in board bylaws. None of this would be possible unless Dr. Miller and staff controlled the Zoom room and website. In normal sessions, the board could simply gavel in. I'm embarrassed at this brazen corruption and these Trump-like tactics. I'm especially disappointed in Ms. Boozer-Struther, a white representative who is disenfranchising the voters of our majority Black county. She's on Twitter promoting individual schools' ad hoc reopening plans while shutting down votes that would legislate equitable reopening plans, the learning hubs, for our most vulnerable students across the county. What's worse, in public and in private communications, the unelected minority and their elected allies have consistently deployed anti-Black stereotypes of Prince George's corruption in order to disarm public opposition to their coup. Dr. Miller has said she wants an audit and an ethics investigation, but an ethics investigation cannot be conducted unless the board meets to convene the ethics committee, as was done for Also Brooks appointee Brian Swan last year, whom Ms. Boozer-Struther campaigned for in the fall. And obviously the board cannot audit itself, it needs a neutral party to do so. No such contract has materialized, and County Council Chair Calvin Hawkins has confirmed that the council does not have the authority to conduct such an audit. Since there is no actual audit or ethics investigation, it appears this boycott is nothing more than an attempt to disenfranchise Prince Georgians and stop elected board members from doing the work they were elected to do.
Mr. Green, thank you. The next
point of order, Madam Chair, just a point of order. One thing that was mentioned in the public comment just now that I was going to reference is that it seems that the link to get into the meeting is not working. So I don't know if board staff want to adjust that. I know that someone who has signed up for public comment has reached out to me and said that they are not able to join the meeting. And so I just wanted to give that heads up as we're proceeding. I don't want someone who has signed up for public comment to be unable to offer their comments just because of a Zoom malfunction. So I don't know what needs to be done here.
Dr. Miller, if I could, there is a technical issue with the website link that we've attempted to rectify, but given that we have also advertised it within the board docs meeting, it is also available there. As you'll see, it's the same link, but there's something wrong with the website. So anyone who is interested in seeing the meeting, including someone who has signed up to testify, they can access the meeting via the link within board docs. We've attempted to rectify it, but without success.
Thank you, Board Member Thomas. The next speaker is Ms. Donna Young.
Madam Chair, actually, Donna Young and also Janice Hagley are not within the meeting room at this time to be brought over as panelists. And so the next one that I am looking for is also Suzanne Johnson.
Just a quick question, Ms. King, have they provided email addresses in their, can we just email them the link? I think, simple, I understand the explanation. It's not anybody here's fault. but we should allow folks to be able to come and offer public comment. So if they've offered an email in their in that form to sign up, can we just email them the link directly so that they can join? Because I know navigating to board docs, going into the agenda, finding the link, copying the link, that's kind of a bit of a runaround. So is that possible, Ms. King? Can we just email them the link directly to have them join?
We'll see if we can follow up on that. I see now that Ms. Janice Heggie is in the weight room at the moment, so we'll go ahead and move her over to be a panelist and provide testimony.
Thank you.
So are you saying Ms. Hagee is here?
See Miss Suzanne.
I see Ms. Johnson. I don't see Ms. Hagee. I'll let Ms. Johnson go ahead now since she's been here. Ms. Johnson, unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Suzanne Johnson. My daughter's in 4th grade. I'm concerned about the hybrid model instruction in the reopening plan because it doesn't include hiring additional staff. Montgomery and Fairfax County Public Schools, on the other hand, are hiring classroom monitors that can assist with things like classroom management and help in-person students with technology issues. Whereas PGCPS teachers will now need to support students in the classroom and at home, in addition to all the other demands we have put on our teachers this year. The additional challenges of managing both modes will surely have a detrimental impact on instruction for students at home and in the classroom. The instructional benefits for students attending school in person will be limited at best if teachers are simultaneously supporting students at home. Teachers will have to utilize the distance learning platform to deliver synchronous instruction to both groups of students at the same time. Students will be sitting in front of computer screens when they're virtual and when they're in the classroom. The students in the school building won't be getting the benefit of traditional face-to-face instruction. Thus, the same concerns about virtual instruction leading to learning gaps will still exist. For our most vulnerable students struggling with virtual instruction, the reopening plan doesn't provide an opportunity to expand in-person support beyond the 2 days per week for the last 9 weeks of school. That's 18 days. Okay. The board has demonstrated support for equity learning hubs that could expand this to 4 or 5 days per week for targeted populations. And the final vote was on the agenda for the board meeting that was canceled on February 11th. PGCPS and the board need to work together to give these students the additional support they need. Later this evening, the board will be voting on the PGCPS $2.3 billion budget request for fiscal year 22. When each of you is responsible for oversight of a school system with such a large budget, the work cannot stop over internal bickering as we've seen this past month, especially when these disputes do not directly impact the students, as they deal with contracts in support of a board of the board itself, which represents 0.01% of the overall budget. Financial integrity with taxpayer dollars is certainly a concern, and there is an ethics panel that can address these concerns while the board continues their duties. Our community, your constituents, demand that you resume activities that impact the education and well-being of our students and school staff. You are responsible for overseeing the safe return to school buildings as we deal with a deadly pandemic, addressing the outstanding mental issues that have surely grown due to the pandemic, ending the school to prison pipeline, closing the literacy gap and other systematic education gaps that have only widened with the pandemic, just to name a few of the things that need to be a much bigger focus than these internal board operations and disputes. Over the past several weeks, the chaos and dysfunction among the Prince George's Board of Education has been extremely unproductive and infuriating, and certainly does not make me PGS proud, nor Prince George's proud. Our children deserve better. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. David Kahn.
My apologies, Madam Chair. We actually have Janice Hagee, who was actually able to log in, so she's joining as a panelist at the moment.
Okay, Ms. Hagee. Ms. Hagee. I don't see her name up.
Looks like she's here.
Yeah, it took a moment. She's here now.
I see it. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Hagee, would you like to begin? Unmute yourself. Ms. Hagee. Ms. Hagee.
Maybe there is some technical issues involved. I will ask, I'll move over Mr. David Kahn at the moment and see if Ms. Heggie can then resolve whatever technical issues she may be having.
Thank you. Mr. Khan.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk lately about whether so-called public servants are complying with their oath of office. Let me be very frank. When board members refuse to attend board meetings because they are afraid that they will lose votes, when they try to deny a quorum to the board by doing that, that is called nonfeasance. That is not compatible with their oath of office. When a board chair cancels meetings because she's concerned about contract issues or because she thinks there might be a lack of a quorum, that is malfeasance. And
the reopening of schools.
Point of order, point of order, Dr. Mello. This public comment is for anyone to comment on anything. This is not about reopening. Sorry.
Well, well, you may be sorry, but the notice indicated that the comments would be directed towards the reopening of schools. The speakers, if they have comments relative to other issues that are taking place on the board, will have the opportunity to do that. I understand that for the March 11th meeting.
Madam Chair, we cannot talk about the opening of schools if you don't have meetings. So please let me talk about having meetings to talk about the opening of schools. And don't count this against my time either. This is not fair. You've let other speakers talk. Please let me finish.
I'm not trying to cut you off, Mr. Khan. I'm just asking you to direct your comments towards the reopening of schools. That is what this agenda indicated. It was
all of my comments
and the comments
are
should be
aimed at the board being able to discuss the opening of schools. So may I continue my way, and it may not be what you like to hear. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. I would like to recapture my time. Can you start my clock again wherever I was when you interrupted me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. As I was saying, in order for the board to serve the students and the people of this county, the adults and the students, you have to come to board meetings and you have to have board meetings. So this is directly on topic. Okay, let's get a little history. Until 2002, we had an all-elected board. The people had full voting rights. The board was somewhat dysfunctional. They fought with their superintendent, and we were at the bottom of the heap, the second lowest county. So the all-appointed board was enacted by the legislature. And guess what? It was dysfunctional, and it fought with its superintendent, and we were still at the bottom. We got then a very strange hybrid sort of board, and that was dysfunctional and fought with its superintendent, and we stayed at the bottom. Then we got our elected board back. And it wasn't really that dysfunctional, but it wasn't great. That fought with its superintendent, and we were at the bottom of the heap. Then came 1107. And guess what? When they put in this strange board that we have now, well, at least there's no fights with the superintendent, but it's still dysfunctional, and we're still at the bottom. Very frankly, it doesn't matter. The structure of the board does not matter to our students as far as their performance. We have problems in the school district that really need to be solved. It can't be solved with a board that is divided like this board is. As another speaker said, the county executive said when she was running that she didn't want the board to be this way. Now that she's won, I hope she will fulfill her campaign promise. There's talk that she wants to run for governor, so be it. But how can anybody believe that she will keep her promises as governor if she won't keep her promises as county executive? We need to go back to an all-elected board with 9 single-member districts. And very frankly, we are the only jurisdiction in the state to have ever had full voting rights, 100% of the board elected by the people, and had that taken away by the legislature. That is racist. And although a hybrid board is not in itself racist, the denial of voting rights, the taking away of voting rights, once having been granted to us, is very much racist. And in a majority minority county like this, it is outrageous. And
Would you bring your sentence to a close?
thank you very much. And the close is that, as far as I understood, Mr. Murray's motion was to be able to discuss all 6 or so issues that he mentioned. It was passed, and to limit this to one item does not seem right. In any case, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to the board.
Thank you for your comments. We will move on to the next speaker, Lisa Lake. Or did Ms. Hager get her? Well, I'll move on to Lisa Lake. Is Ms. Lake available?
No, I show that Ms. Lake is not in the attendee room at the moment, nor is Ms. Hagee. I think that concludes all of our speakers for this evening.
Okay, we have 2 individuals that have signed up to provide written testimony, which will be posted on board docs for everyone's review. They are Andrea Stutzman and Miss Debbie Van Camp. Ms. Van Camp is from the Hyattsville Elementary PTA. That concludes our public comments. May I have a motion to adjourn? Board Member Joshua Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I have a point of order just in relation to the discussion that took place prior to public comment. I know that that vote was cast, but I do want to just note that Maryland state law, as according to HB 1107, does state that unfortunately the student member may vote on all matters before the board except those relating to, and item 3 is collective bargaining decisions. Therefore, I would like to cite that law. The vote was cast if I think if board members would like to vote once more, but that does change the outcome of that vote. And so if counsel, Mr. Thomas would like to comment on it, but I think that that is pretty clear stated in the law. And while I will also just add on the record, I do support full voting rights for the student member of the board. That is true, but that just does not apply in this situation. That has not happened as of yet. And so for board members who like to follow the law, I think we should follow the law. Thank you. And I therefore ask, then can a either a ruling be given, or if a ruling can be given, or if we can have a restatement of the vote and that be reflected in the minutes. Thank you. Sorry.
Roger Thomas.
Mr. Thomas, you're on mute, sir.
Mr. Thomas is correct in his assertion that the student board members' vote would not count on collective bargaining matters, and maybe the sponsoring board member of the motion can clarify what his intent was, because Mr. Murray's motion did propose that there would be engagement with bargaining units for an MOU. I didn't take that to constitute a collective bargaining process that would in some way revise the present negotiated agreements. If the board member can clarify his intent around that. And also, I want to remind the board that you all have the authority to take a vote if there's a dispute on whether or not the student board members' vote should count on the issue before the board.
Thank you,
Or
Mr.
whether
Thomas.
it
I think
involves a matter for which the student board members' vote cannot count.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I think that this is clearly part of the collective bargaining process. Additionally, if you'd read, I can't remember if it's above or below it, that it also the student member can't vote on decisions of school reopenings and closings, which this clearly is. If you'd like us to vote, Mr. Thomas, we will. I think this is a very open and shut, clear interpretation of the law. If you could, please just rule clearly. I think it's very apparent to everyone that's read it. But if not, the board will be happy to vote.
Mr. Board Member Valentine.
No, I mean, I'm just wanting Mr. Thomas to clarify, because the way you interpreted it before is that because this was a action by the CEO, it would take 2/3 vote of the board. Just wanted clarity on that.
Yes, that is correct. And that statement was made based upon the fact that the school reopening and closing falls within the purview of the day-to-day responsibilities of the CEO. So in order for the board to take action contrary to the action of the CEO would require a 2/3 vote. The issue at discussion right now, however, is whether or not the student board member vote counts on the issue of a collective bargaining issue, and also on school reopening, school closings and reopening. So Mr. Murray is correct on that, and I think the discussion that involves school opening and closing, the student board members' vote would not count. However, I do want to point out that as to Mr. Murray's motion as it was made, and let me go look at my notes. His motion was whether or not the administration would need to bring the matter back to the board for its vote. So that was the content of the motion. It wasn't about whether or not the board would be approving or not approving the school reopening plan of the CEO.
So in that case, then does the motion stand as indicated, or do we have to have a 2/3 vote? Because my understanding also was that Board Member Murray was asking that the CEO provide the board with the plan, and the plan should include the MOUs with the unions. So my understanding was that Board Member Murray was asking his motion was in reference to the CEO providing the board with the reopening plan for us to review, and that was, and it should include information relative to MOUs with the union.
Right. The motion, as I understand it, and the keeper of the record can certainly read it back, but Mr. Murray's motion, I believe, in this instance, was to move that the CEO bring the plan back to the board. So that wasn't a motion to vote substantively on the plan, for which I agree that the student board members' vote would not be counted. And I hope I'm being clear enough on this.
Well, the clarity would be to determine, for you to share with the board members, whether that motion carries or whether another vote is needed, or in reference to whether the students' vote counts in this, on that particular motion. Okay, so to the extent that the motion as it was made was whether or not the matter should be brought back to the board for its further review and deliberation, the student board member, in my opinion, the student board member's vote, in my opinion, does count. And it was counted in the tally of the votes that took place on that issue. Mr. Board Member Joshua Thomas, your hand is still up. Oh, so then that motion carried. Am I correct, Mr. Roger Thomas? The motion carries. That would be my recommendation. And as I said, if there's a dispute, the board can certainly vote to take some other position on it.
but I do draw a distinction between whether or not the issue, whether or not the board required the CEO to bring the issue back to you all versus the board voting on the substantive content of the plan.
Thank you. Any more comments? Thank
Dr.
you.
Miller, I'd like to call Dr. Miller under HB 1107, as the board attorney indicated, the board can vote on whether it believes this is a matter in which a student member votes on. So I would like to call the roll on the board voting whether the student vote on the motion or just the passing of it, as after that vote it would pass 7-6.
I'm not understanding your motion, Mr.
So,
So it sounds good. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you have it, Ms. Thomas.
I don't want to try to interpret what Mr. Murray's intent is, but it sounds like he's asking the board to take a vote on whether or not the student board members' vote should be allowed to count on the issue that the board has just previously engaged in the discussion. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Board Member Valentine.
So just to to clarify, and so in this case, I imagine you're going to interpret that the board, that the student member doesn't have the right to vote on whether she has the right to vote, Mr. Thomas?
I would say yes, unless, let me look at the language exactly to make sure that
as you're doing that, in this case, a board member could put a vote up for every vote the student member ever takes can be put up for a vote of this board in which she would never have the right to vote of whether or not she has the right, which would nullify her vote, every vote she takes, because you're saying that the majority of the board, which clearly on this case does not believe she should have the vote, which is against the interpretation of board counsel, is taking her vote away and the right for her to decide whether she has the right. After you just said that your interpretation, that the motion to bring this back, which is not necessarily the reopening of the school, but the motion to bring it back is not something that the school board member cannot vote on. And so if this is the precedent today, every vote from now until the end of this year could be where the student member does vote, could be put up for a vote by any member who does not agree with the vote of the student member, and thus nullify her voting rights and the rights of every student member, every member of the Board of Prince George's County Public Schools who voted for her to have a voice. Mr. Thomas, do you understand what I'm saying?
yes, I do. And let me read from the statute itself. The statute at issue is in section 3-1002, and it states that the student board member may vote on all matters before the board except those relating to capital and operating budgets, school closings, reopenings and boundaries, collective bargaining decisions, student disciplinary matters, teacher and administrator disciplinary matters as provided under section 6-202A of this article, and other personnel matters. It also says, on an affirmative vote of a majority of the elected and appointed members of the county board, the board may determine if a matter before the board relates to a subject that the student member may not vote on under paragraph 3 of this subsection. So, and that's the exact language of the statute, and I understand your concerns, Mr. Valentine's, about how that may play out. However, that is what the statutory language states under the provision.
One final question to you. You are our board counsel.
Yes.
You are responsible for interpreting the law to ensure that we are in accordance with the law. Based on your expertise, does the student member have the right to vote on the motion brought forth by my board colleague, Mr. Murray, yes or no?
The answer I would give to that would be yes.
So
because
is this motion legal based on your interpretation?
Based on my interpretation, I've given the interpretation on the motion at issue that was made by Mr. Murray, that the student board members' vote counts on that.
So for those who make motions that are against the law as you interpret it, does that put us in any way in jeopardy based on the right of the student member, Miss Jackson, to appeal that to a higher body.
Yes, I mean, I have to be clear with the board about my role as counsel. My role as counsel is to provide advice, counsel, and recommendation. I don't get to have the final say on it. So I have given you all my opinion based upon my interpretation of the statutory requirement.
Thank you very much.
Then my question is, does the vote stand as taken earlier?
And again, I've given my recommendation and advice, and that is that the student board members vote counts.
Thank you.
And
Board
then
Member Queen, your hand was up. Is someone else saying something?
Yes, I'm
Board
sorry.
Member Queen.
Yes, and I just wanted to agree. From my understanding of actually everything just was said, we need to even take the vote again, because I still think it goes in the fact that the MOU is actually something dealing with a bargaining unit. And when you're talking about the reopening and closing of school, it still has something to do for student board members. So with them too, is something that we do need to take a vote back on.
Well, the plan, no, well, Mr. Thomas, my understanding was the vote was to bring the plan back to the board to include the MOUs. It did not say that there would be a voting on MOUs at that time. So my understanding, and I'd like for you to make that very clear, we voted on having a plan brought to the board for review, and for that plan to include whatever negotiating or MOUs that were included in that plan. Am I correct?
That's correct. That is the distinction that I made on that issue, and you stated it correctly.
So the motion stands, and I'll recognize the hands. I saw Ms. Stafford's hand first. Board Member Stafford.
Member Thomas was before me, and then Board Member Burrows, then myself, then Ms. Ahmed.
I don't see Mr. Burrows' hand up.
Right here.
Dr. Miller, there was a motion on the table to rule on the student members' vote counting in this process. I believe that motion must still be voted on. I will just add, was it seconded as well? Are we in the discussion for this?
I don't remember.
I did say second, just Board Member Queen.
Yeah, so we are in the discussion for this, I imagine, and so therefore, I wanted to just point out or respond to my colleague, Mr. Valentine, who notes that this might be setting some kind of or precedent that at any point we could challenge or vote as a board to remove the student board members' vote. Again, it is very clear what the law states, the several items that the student board member is not able to vote on. There are just several items, and so it is not at all my intent to continue to do this for future opportunities. There are clear items that are listed. If those fall within the purview, as this board has done in the past to previous student board members, they have chosen to also lean into this. Let me also just add one other piece as it relates to Mr. Valentine, some questions that you had for board counsel and his role to advise us and therefore for us to then take his counsel. I just want to point out that for the meeting 2 weeks ago, there were several items on the agenda that we voted on as a board, that board counsel advised the chair to put on the agenda, and the chair chose not to have the meeting at all. So I don't appreciate when board members want to use rules to work one way in their favor. I will not be interrupted. So I will not be interrupted. And so I just want to note that is what is expected. So I will just make sure that it's clear that is that is the role of board counsel. Thank you very much. That is what I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you. On this issue as well, as you all deliberate this, I also want to remind the board that the issue of school reopening is not subject to negotiations under collective bargaining agreements. So I just want to remind the board about that as well.
Mr. Thomas, I wanted to know for parliamentary purposes, Board Member Joshua Thomas had a motion on the floor, which was second to, I want to use the right terminology. Was it to revoke the student members' vote on that issue relative to?
I think the motion, Madam
Yes.
Chair, as I understood the motion that was made by Mr. Murray, I'm not certain who seconded it, but the motion related to having the board taking a vote on whether the matter before you relates to a subject that the student member may not vote on under the education article, under the categories that I listed. Is that correct, Mr. Murray? That was your motion as you stated it?
Yep, that was correct. Just calling for
Right. And I believe there was
the
a
vote of the
second on
board
that
about that
motion,
matter.
correct?
And
Yes.
And there was a
yeah, I
second
believe
on
it was
that
Ms.
motion?
Queen.
Second.
Yep.
Okay, so
and
that motion
might
is
be in
on the floor
everyone's
before
best
the
interest.
board. That motion has been seconded. There has been discussion by the board members on the motion. And Madam Chair, it would be appropriate at this point, if so inclined, to take a vote on the motion.
I have my raised.
Mr. Burrows, Board Member Burrows, your hand is up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is for Mr. Thomas. Do you have the section 3 in front of you on items that the student board member cannot vote on? Is that in front of you right now?
Yes, I'd be happy to reread them. If
Yes.
you would like to. Yes. All right. So the student board member may vote on all matters before the board except those relating to 1, capital and operating budgets, 2, school closings, reopenings and boundaries, 3, collective bargaining decisions, 4, student disciplinary matters, and 5, teacher and administrator disciplinary matters. And other personnel
and
matters.
then
6.
And so,
And then,
Mr. Thomas, my next question is for, I guess, Mr. Murray. Mr. Murray, does your motion relate to school closings, reopenings, or boundaries?
I think that answer is clearly yes.
And when you put in your motion to have a MOU done with the collective bargaining unit, well, is that a part of your motion to have an MOU with the collective bargaining unit?
Yes.
Okay. And so I only asked these I've only asked these 2 questions just for the matter of the record. And that's all. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment because it appears that there are varying interpretations of Mr. Board Member Murray's initial motion, which was for the CEO to provide the board with the plan for reopening, which should include MOUs and any other bargaining actions that will take place in the reopening. It was not about the reopening. It was asking for the plan which would include those other entities. So am I hearing that the student board member is not allowed to vote on requesting a plan to be something that is to be brought to the board? Because that is what the interpretation I have, and I guess 6 other members had when we took the initial vote, that we were Board Member Murray was requesting a plan to be provided to the board. Let me take the privilege of asking Dr. Golson, what was your understanding of the request or the motion?
That it failed and that I would continue to move forward with reopening as stated from the House Bill 1107 ruling. And that Mr. Thomas also stated that board members did not sit in on the negotiated agreement conversations. We do have a liaison that does that, brings it back to the board, and then board takes a vote in closed session.
My question is, what was your understanding in reference to what board member Murray was asking? He asked that you provide a plan. And I'm just trying to clarify.
I've already presented a plan. So at this point, if the board wants to make a recommendation to overturn my plan, then that requires a 2/3 vote, which is what Mr. Thomas shared earlier. But I've already presented a plan. I've presented it to the community, and I've actually discussed it with all board members individually prior to presenting to the community.
Miss, I'm going to ask board member Stafford, you had your hand up.
Yes, I was just wondering if Board Member Murray could read the exact motion again. And from what I'm understanding, we're talking about having at the meeting on Monday an opportunity for board members to bring additional questions, because as you know, we are learning about the plan along with the public. And I believe that what we're asking for is more time for us to read, talk, ask questions, and come back to not take away from what the plan is, but to possibly provide other insight and provide oversight, because we may have some questions and thoughts that may not have been considered. And then also additionally, what I understood was that the board would ask the school system to engage in collective bargaining discussions with our labor partners, who the collective bargaining units of those unions, from what we understand, were not involved or not actively involved at the onset of the development of the plan. And so if those are the two concepts that we're going to be discussing, and that is what it states in the law, that's what I'm understanding. So my question is, I'm asking if Mr. Murray can read the motion again, and that's my understanding of what is happening.
Before Mr. Murray reads, I'd like to give board member Jackson an opportunity, student board member Jackson, an opportunity to make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I appreciate the sentiments I put up. I appreciate what's, the discussion and discourse. However, I would like to argue that even though I've heard comments of, oh, well, we don't want to make this a precedent, we don't plan to do this in the future. I think we all know that this, we've reckoned with this exact situation before. I understand that it is a matter of state statute and interpretation. I want to just let you all know that students are watching. The community is watching. And even though you could just say, well, you're following state law, to those who make and decide state law, I want you to know that the student member is subject to the will of their colleagues. The student member still is a pawn of the will of those who have full voting rights, because the student member does not have full voting rights. The fact of the matter is that inherently, I'm the only board member, one of the only board members who will be experiencing the impact of this reopening plan. I am a student. I'm a senior at a PGCPS high school. And the fact that I cannot have a vote or whatever this discussion is or this discourse is about our reopening plan, both to my colleagues and again, to those who get to decide what I get to vote on. That is abysmal. I just want to say that whatever our vote ends up being, your vote is recorded. And even though you say you support the student voice, that is all and well, but this inherently is contrary to supporting the student voice. So again, I appreciate the discourse. I appreciate what all my colleagues have to say, but that is what I have to say as the current and sitting student member of the board.
I just have a point of clarification from my colleague, Ms. Jackson, but didn't you vote no to talk about the reopening?
So if you would like to discuss my decision, regarding my vote, we can definitely do that. But I stand firm on my vote. And what it shouldn't be is that the student members shouldn't suddenly be try to have their vote debated because they don't vote in the favor of whatever side their colleagues would prefer. So yes, I made my decision.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying now.
What I'm saying,
Don't do that.
just
Let her
because the
talk.
student
Don't do that.
member doesn't vote the way that you would prefer, that does not mean that the student member's vote should be nullified. That's my comments. So I thank you and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Ms. Board Member Jackson. Board Member Williams, your hand was up next. Board Member Williams, Vice Chair.
We've talked about so much. I've moved on. My comments are, well, let me just state this. I do believe that as the chair, the one who facilitates this meeting at some point, and I believe Roger Thomas could probably provide some interpretation based on Robert's rules, you have the authority to make a decision and move on. And if they would like to appeal it later, that is what happens. But as the chair who facilitates this meeting, you have that authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we did have a motion on the floor. Oh, Ms. Board Member Queen, your hand is up.
Madam Chair, can we have the recorder, this board secretary, assistants or whatever, to read the original motion? Because it seemed like a lot of people was unclear on the original motion. So can we just have the original motion that was made earlier read?
Mr. Thomas,
That would be.
you're on mute.
Wouldn't that be Ms. King or Amber that would be?
Yes, the recorder of the minutes would be the board office staff,
Right.
Madam Chair.
Well, at the lateness of this hour and the time it would take to get that, at this point, I'm just going to have to say we have been given an opinion by our legal counsel in reference to the motion, the initial motion made by Mr. Board Member Murray, which the motion failed. And now there's a motion to on the floor to revoke the students' right to vote on that initial motion. I'm going to ask that we table this and we can review this issue since we are way past time for our next meeting. I'm going to ask that we table this issue and come back to it at our March 11th meeting. Ms. Board Member Stafford, you mentioned a meeting on Monday. Is that a committee meeting that you're making reference to or a board meeting that has been decided by a majority? I'm not clear on that.
Dr. Miller, could I provide a point of order?
What are you referring, what are you referring to, the budget meeting?
You mentioned that there's a meeting on Monday at 6:30 and I haven't been made aware of it yet.
Tomorrow.
We can talk offline.
I thought, yeah, maybe I'm.
Okay, Board Member Murray.
Yep, thank you, Dr. Chair. I mean, there's a motion on the floor. We can't just unilaterally table it. I think we could just go ahead and, if we could just call the roll, would probably be the quickest resolution to this.
All right, then let's call the roll. We're voting to revoke the vote.
Madam Chair, I believe you would be calling the roll on the, I believe you made the motion to table. Was there a second on the motion to table?
No, but there, Mr. Board Member Murray had a motion that was second on the floor to revoke the students' vote on the initial motion. And there was a second, and he just indicated, point of order, that there was that motion to revoke the students' vote. So And I asked, I didn't demand, I asked that we table it, but it appears that Mr. Murray, Board Member Murray would prefer that we proceed with the vote. So being compliant, I will call for the vote on whether to revoke and let me make sure, and please clarify, this vote that you're taking now that has been moved in second is to revoke the students' vote on that first item, on the first item or issue that Board Member Murray brought to the board in reference to having the CEO provide the board members with the plan for reopening, which should include the MOUs and other bargaining information.
Dr. Miller, the motion to chair overrides that motion.
Say that again, Board Member Valentine.
I was saying, based on Board Member Williams' recommendation to you, if that is your choice as chair, the motion to table would override any previous motion.
Parliamentary procedures. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, the point that I was going to make before you stated those comments is you made, what I understood you made was a motion to table. My question was there a second on the motion to table, which would then require the vote on your motion to table?
Second.
I second it.
Okay, so there was a second on the motion to table. So that's the action before the board.
So all in favor of tabling?
Aye.
Roll call.
Okay, so we're taking a roll now?
Roll call, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Miss Adams Stafford.
Nay.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
No.
Mrs. Ahmed. Mrs. Ahmed?
No.
Ms. Boozer Struther.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows.
No.
Mr. Harris.
No.
Miss Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Montero.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
No.
Mrs. Queen.
I still have questions. I asked for the original motion to be reread. We're talking about taping something to March 11th, which still go back to the original motion. So as a board member, I don't feel like my questions are being answered. So I'm just gonna abstain.
Mrs. Shepherd.
I'm also confused about the motion, so I'm gonna abstain as well.
Motion to table this discussion, Ms. Shepherd.
So the discussion that our student board member cannot vote, am I correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so yes.
Okay, Mr. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Valentine.
Aye.
Mrs. Williams.
Yes.
Dr. Miller.
Yes.
One moment, please. We have 7 yes, 6 no's, and 1 abstention.
So the motion carries. Thank you, colleagues.
No, ma'am.
No, actually, the motion does not, because the student board member's vote was counted, which means that to carry would be a motion of a vote of 8. And I'll verify that. Because the count was 7 yays, correct?
No.
There were 6 no, 7 yes, and 1 abstention.
But the original 7-7, it had failed.
Right, because if the student board member's vote was taken to count on that issue on the motion to table, which means it would require a vote, affirmative vote of 8. There were 7. There were only 7.
But we're not voting on her to vote. We're voting to table this conversation.
Correct.
So there is a difference. So her vote
Correct.
counts to table this.
That's correct.
And so,
So
it
it's
requires-
7 to 6 and 1.
Yeah, it would require 8.
Sure.
So,
I mean, unless a board member is willing to change their vote on it.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Who is that? Mr. Burrows, Board Member Burrows?
Yes, ma'am. Am I recognized, Madam
I'm
Chair?
acknowledging. Yes.
Okay, thank you. The motion to table, as Mr. Thomas indicated, requires 8 votes because the student board member can vote on that. Because that motion failed, we should. I'd like to call the question on the main motion, which is to include the student board member's vote on Mr. Murray's motion and to deem that motion passed, basically. And so I'd like to call the roll.
can we just get a clarification on what an aye vote would mean here versus what a nay vote would mean? Would I mean that you are voting that the student member should be voting on this matter or should not be voting on this matter? Could we just get a point of clarification?
Sure. Mr. Murray's motion was to exclude the student board member's vote. Actually, I think it was your motion, Josh, was to exclude the board member's vote. And so a yes vote would be to exclude, a no vote would be to not exclude.
Thank you.
Any call for the question?
I still have a point of clarification. Madam Chair, can I be recognized?
Board Member Queen.
Thank you so very much. Even earlier you kept saying the student board member, and even what Mr. Barrows is saying now, whether the count, I think the main thing that really got me, and I think if we listen to what our attorney has been saying is because of the fact it has something to do with schools opening and closing, and because it has something to do with a bargaining unit, that the student board member is not valid. And that's where you guys are losing me at. The wording that you're using has nothing to do with the fact that because of these 2 things, her vote would not be valid on this. It's not saying that she will never be able to vote. It's just for these 2 incidents and the 2 things that was mentioned. And that's why I asked for the original motion to be read again, that it is not valid for her to vote on, or whoever, her or him or whoever. And so that's what I really need clarification on, because the way you guys are wording it and the way you guys keep throwing things out is like as if, student board member can't vote on this. And no, it's not that. It's just that we have been told several times that certain things, and these 2 things, anything we're doing with money and hiring or firing people or closing and reopening. So I just want clarification. I really do, as a board member.
Mr. Thomas, would you clarify what the vote was about? Was it about a plan? Was it about MOUs or bargaining units? Please clarify what Mr. Board Member Murray's initial motion was.
Okay, the motion, as I understood that Mr. Murray made, was to have the plan, to require that the plan be brought back to the board for approval. That was the motion as I understood it, and also that there be an MOU negotiated with bargaining units. And I think Ms. Queen's request that the official keeper of the minutes reread the motion is an appropriate one, if it's available.
Are you asking for them to bring it up now?
If the minutes, if it's possible, yes. I think Ms. Queen's request, just so that there's clarity from the official minutes, to have that reread would be helpful.
Ms. King, is that possible to get it now?
Ms. Tate? If you
Ms.
could
Tate.
read the motion, please.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I have the motion as such, to have the reopening plan brought back to the next board meeting on March 11th for a vote to include the MOU negotiated bargaining.
So again, my understanding, well, Mr. Thomas, my understanding is that that motion was to bring a plan back to the board. Am I correct?
That's what I heard read. And again, if the board, is still unclear, I read to you what the statutory authority was for the board to vote on whether or not the vote of the student board member should not count.
Board Member Valentine.
I mean, and I appreciate the conversation we're having and where the sticking points are. And I think my point of clarification is around the original motion and the motion by my colleague that the plan be brought back, including the MOUs or any other negotiating agreements that were made between the system and the school board, not a negotiation of a new MOU or anything new moving forward. That was the original motion. Now, since then, clearly there's been a back and forth and some movement on that. But what was supposed to be brought back was not a creation of a new MOU, but whatever was existing, we bring that back for clarification and go to committee. I think there was talk about going to committees, having communities comment on it and all those things, but not to actually sit down and have a negotiated conversation with bargaining units. That has not happened directly with school board members. I've been on the board for 8 years. I mean, and so I would like Dr. Golson to also comment, but that was the original motion as was read.
We have board approved negotiated agreements that we will continue to execute until the conclusion of those negotiated agreements. We have no negotiated agreements that are up for discussion with the exception of ASASP at the conclusion of this school year, not anytime sooner. We do have one labor agreement that allows us to have an opener to discuss a memorandum. We have our board designee who has done that. That was Mr. Burnett. That has been done and completed. What it now is being asked is additional MOUs with other labor partners. We already have a negotiated agreement, which we are willingly going to execute and have not violated since we started this pandemic on March 13th, 2020.
Mr. Roger Thomas.
And I just I want to reiterate for the board and Dr. Golson and Mr. Burnett, who I think are both in this meeting, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that school closing, openings, those are not subjects of collective bargaining.
It is not. It is not.
So I caution the board of potentially bringing those issues into the collective bargaining process through an MOU.
And school has never closed. Let's be clear. Our 134,000 students will tell you it has been open.
Did you say caution, Mr. Roger Thomas?
Yeah, because yes, if you raise that issue and bring it into what could potentially be interpreted by the unions as the collective bargaining process as something that the board is going to now say is a permissible issue, that's not going to be a positive thing for the school system. And Dr. Golson can speak for the administration around that.
That is correct. Dr. Golson will continue to execute the negotiated agreements. Anything different than that means that we will have to have a separate conversation with legal.
Point of order, Madam Chair, the question has been called. Can we vote on this matter?
Well,
there are two hands up.
Point of order. Point of order.
Madam Vice Chair.
So when a question is called to stop the debate, we have to vote on stopping the debate. Just calling the question according to Robert's rules, and you can look it up. You cannot stop the debate. You have to vote on stopping the debate. So if you want to stop the debate, we have to take a vote, and it requires 2/3 vote to stop the debate. We've been doing it wrong all this time.
So is there
So
a
if we want
motion
to
to stop the debate?
Well, we only have two more hands up.
Oh, okay.
Jackson, and then maybe we.
Mr. Burrows, Board Member Burrows.
I'm good, thank you.
Oh, your hand is still up. Board Member Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to like further complicate the discussion, but I do want to uplift what Dr. Golden said about like the around the usage of school reopening. I know colloquially we're saying schools are being reopened, but schools, I can attest as a student, schools have very well, in fact, been opened. I've been sitting in class, kind of. Don't tell my teachers. I've been sitting in class for the most part. So schools have been opened. So yeah, just want to throw that out there.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Thomas, your hand is up. And you need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I was reading something. I didn't mean to have my hand up. Let me lower it. Thank you.
Dr. Miller, just based on what you heard from Dr. Golson and from Howard Burnett, I would like Dr. Thomas to give one final interpretation of the legality of this vote based on what you heard from Dr. Golson and Howard Burnett around whether this constitutes something that a student member can or cannot vote on.
So my response earlier does not change. You know, so I don't know what more I can add to the discussion that I've already had with the board on that. Thank you, Mr. Valentine.
I just wanted a point of clarification for Board Member Murray. The MOU is not necessarily discussing reopening with the bargaining, collective bargaining units of these unions, but rather the health and safety and working conditions, which since school has never closed, these are still issues that union members are concerned about. Is that correct?
Yes, Ms. Adams Stafford.
Okay.
And I also just want to be clear, all of that is outlined in our operational guide as well as our reopening guide. And I have never said that I would not continue to work with our labor partners to have open dialogue and communication. That's not who I am, and that has not been who I am since I started in this position.
May I have a motion to end the debate? Oh, Ms. Queen, Board Member Queen.
I actually was gonna see if I can make a motion to end the debate, and I don't know if we have. Are we getting a vote on something, or are we just gonna go ahead and move it to March the 11th? I'm kind of like lost, Madam Chair.
Are you making a motion to end the debate? That's where we are.
Yes,
right now.
I'll make a motion to end the debate.
Point of order, I don't believe, I want to read board policy here. Board policy 9366, in regards to calling the question, says during the debate, the chair shall keep a list of those wishing to speak. If the question is called during the course of the debate, while there are still names on the list, the chair shall allow all those on the list to speak. The chair shall not, however, add any new names to the list after the question has been called. The prohibition against adding names to the list after the question has been called shall not apply to points of order, points of special privilege, or other exceptions to the rules governing debate as set out in Robert's rules. Mr. Burrows called the question several minutes ago on the motion to on Mr. Murray's motion for surrounding the student board member, and so I believe that procedurally we can vote on that.
Mr. Thomas, Roger Thomas.
Yes, and I thought that, there was a lot of in between that happened up to Ms. Ahmed's statement, but I do believe that is the issue that is currently on the floor from my note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what is on the floor now? Let's be very clear.
The matter on the floor, as I understand it, and as is reflected at least in the notes that I've taken up to now, is whether the student board members' vote should count.
Okay, and it has been moved and second. Roll call.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Who is that? Mr. Burrows?
Yes, the motion was not whether or not the student board members should count. The motion was to exclude the student board members' vote. And that phrasing completely changes the yes and the no's. And so I just want to be very clear that members know what they're voting on. The motion on the floor is essentially to exclude the student board members' vote on Mr. Murray's motion. So
Mr. Murray's first motion, correct?
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And just as a point of clarification, that would mean, Mr. Burrows, and just for everyone to make sure, voting yes would be yes to exclude the student board member's vote. Voting no would allow the student board member to vote.
Yes.
Thank you.
Are we ready for the roll call?
Yes, we're ready for the roll call.
Thank you.
No, point of order, are we still on call the question or are we on the actual vote?
Call for the question.
No, you're on the actual vote, correct?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
We're voting.
You just said call the question, but you're voting now.
Okay, so are we ready at this time? I have for the motion to exclude the student board member vote on Mr. Murray's first motion, correct?
Correct.
That's what we're voting on, right? Okay, so Mrs. Adams Stafford,
Yes, based on the legal definitions that were read, that we heard.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Aye.
Ms. Boozer Struther,
No.
Mr. Burrows,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
No.
Mr. Montero,
No.
Mr. Murray,
Yes, and as a point of order, Ms. Jackson doesn't vote on whether to vote.
Point of order, Mr. Thomas, Roger Thomas.
Again, I've read about 3 times this evening the matters on which the student board members' vote may not count. I can go through those again.
This isn't one
Does
of
the
them.
student get to vote on this issue?
This ain't one of them.
I would say yes. I don't see language excluding it on this issue.
Mr. Thomas, point of order. We literally had this same debate in executive session some months back, and there's a legal definition of elected and a legal definition of appointed members. I posed that very same question to you then, which is why when we had that previous executive session vote, the student board member did not vote. There's a legal definition for elected and appointed members, of which the student member is not either, based on that very same law.
On that, and that falls under section 3-1002, and it defines an appointed member, and it also defines an elected member, and then there's another category for the student member.
Yes, exactly. So based on that, she's not in the categories that vote on this, which is the elected and the appointed members.
Well, but the statute itself, it states the student member may vote on all matters before the board except those relating to capital and operating budget, school closings, reopenings and boundaries, collective bargaining, student disciplinary matters, teacher and administrator disciplinary matters, other personnel matters.
One point of order. Mr. Thomas, if you continue to read to paragraph 4, it says on an affirmative vote.
Oh, yeah, I'm about to get there. And it also says on an affirmative vote of majority of the elected board and appointed members of county board. Okay, so, and I think what the discussion that Mr. Murray was referring to is the language talking about vote of a majority of the elected and appointed members. So you are correct that the student board member is neither an elected or appointed member of the county board. which means in this instance, her vote would not count on this specific issue. So Mr. Murray is correct on that language from the statute.
Okay, shall I conclude with the roll call?
Sure.
Unless there are questions.
Okay.
And thank you, Mr. Murray, for raising that issue.
No problems, Tom.
Mrs. Queen,
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd,
No, because our students' voice do matter.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine.
No.
Mrs. Williams,
No.
Dr. Miller.
No.
One moment, please. We have 7 yes and 6 no's.
Therefore, that means that the students vote on Board Member Murray's initial motion for the CEO to bring the plan back to the board is void. And we will take another vote. Now, correct me if this is inappropriate parliamentary procedure. With that being voided, we would need to take another vote on on Board Member Murray's initial motion for the CEO to bring to the board the plan for reopening, which will include information on MOUs and other negotiating parties. Is that correct, Mr. Rogers? I mean,
That no problem. That I'm called that many times, by the way. But yes, that would be an accurate statement. I do recommend that the board should take the vote again on Mr. Murray's initial motion.
Thank you. Board Member Joshua Thomas, you had your hand up.
No, ma'am, that's fine. Let's go ahead and move forward with the vote. Could we just have the motion stated once more, just for clarity for folks, and then I call the question once again.
Board Member Murray, would you state your original motion?
Sure, give me just 1 second.
Board
The
Member.
motion was I move to have the reopening plan come back to the board for approval at our next regularly scheduled board meeting on March 11th. I move to direct the CEO to enter into negotiations for an MOU on reopening with labor partners that would like to do so, with Board Member Shayla Adams Stafford as the board's representative at those negotiations.
Second.
It has been moved in second to request the CEO to provide the board with a plan for reopening, which includes negotiations and MOUs with labor. Call for the question.
Oh, y'all here? Are you? Excuse me. I'm on a video meeting here.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, I think
He's put himself on mute. He put himself on mute. Okay, roll call. Oh, wait a minute.
I
Excuse
have a hand up.
me. Board Member Valentine.
I had a question for Mr. Thomas, but he seemed like he may have his hand full.
I have to get some water.
Mr. Thomas, just a quick question to you, just based on my colleague's motion. Mr. Thomas? Yeah, you're muted there.
I'm here. I'm listening.
Is it permissible for, based on the directive that this motion would give to the administration around MOUs for partners that want to enter into them, is this permissible based on existing agreements the administration has and the timeline of future agreements with collective bargaining units? Is this a permissible vote?
So again, I've already stated the concern I have around this, and that is that the issues of, school reopenings, school closings, those are not issues for collective bargaining. I'm concerned about the union's perceiving that this now comes into the purview of the bargaining process. So whatever discussions occur, I think that it needs to be made clear that, this is not occurring within the context of the CBA.
Getting had karaoke night, y'all.
Excuse me, Ms. Queen, would you please mute yourself?
Sorry.
And so Mr. Thomas.
That's my concern, and I think Dr. Goldson has also stated that, but I understand Mr. Murray's motion, but if discussion is going to occur with the union, I think it needs to be made 100% crystal clear that that is not occurring in the context of the collective bargaining process.
So it's a follow-up question. And this is kind of a general question, but it does speak to this motion. In instances where you're interpreting the law and we are picking votes contrary to that, what type of issues does this arise for us legally that could arise from this being taken to another higher body saying that the vote that was taken tonight was impermissible based on existing policy and law?
Well, I can't play out what might occur in the future based upon the board's action. My role as board counsel would be to defend the vote that you may take or not take this evening. There are always going to be, those who either are going to be in agreement or disputing processes. So, I've given, my best information this evening on the substantive issues before you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Stafford.
Mr. Murray, just point of clarification, we're talking about working conditions which can be discussed.
No. No.
And as part of the MOU.
Plan. The vote.
We're talking about the, Dr. Miller, I'm sorry.
The motion is asked for the CEO to provide the board with a plan. It has nothing to do with working. I mean, that may be included in the plan, but Board Member Murray's motion is for the CEO to provide the board with the reopening plan.
And there was also the point about having the sort of the bargaining process with the yes. Okay, and that's not regarding, that's regarding working conditions that our labor partners.
That was not a part of his motion. His motion was having the agreement and an MOU. There was nothing about the anything about cleaning. We do have another meeting to go to. So if in fact we have to continue with this, let's, can I get someone to call for the vote? Well, we did have a vote and it was stopped. So to read.
We're supposed to be reading the motion on the table and then taking a vote. That is where we are now.
Okay.
And the motion has been read. So are we able to just go ahead with a vote here, colleagues? Motion has been read by Mr. Murray.
And that is to ask for the plan with the additional information. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. Roll call. All in favor of Board Member Murray's motion?
I think we're going to need to take a roll call, Madam Chair.
Okay, roll call.
Mrs. Adams Stafford?
Yes.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes.
Ms. Boozer Struther?
No.
Mr. Burrows?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Montero?
No.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mrs. Queen?
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd?
No.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Valentine?
No.
Mrs. Williams?
No.
Dr. Miller?
No.
One moment, please. We have 7 yes and 6 no.
So the motion carries. With that, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn.
So
this.
moved.
So moved.
Second if I have to.
It has been moved in second to adjourn this meeting, this public meeting on the reopening of schools. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? This meeting is adjourned.